Hello, everyone. This is Katrina Van Huss with Turnkey, and welcome today. Before we get started with John Vranas of Make-A-Wish, just a couple of little housekeeping things. If someone out there in the audience could chat me and just let me know that you can see our screen and hear us, just to make sure that everything is fine, I would really appreciate it. Let's see, Sandra, Yana, Madeline, if one of you guys could let me know you can hear me, that would be great. I still don't have affirmation. If someone could chat me on the chat tool, that would be fantastic. Okay, very good. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, everyone. All right, so before we get started, most of you know Turnkey, so I'm going to dispense with telling you who we are. But I will tell you that Otis, Fulton, and I, our behavioral expert, and myself, we will be at Do Good Data on Thursday presenting there. So if any of you happen to be at that conference, we would love to see you there in our session. We're going to jump right in. With us today, we have John Vranas, VP and Chief Marketing Officer of Make-A-Wish America. I've known John for many years, and this picture of him does not do him justice. What would do him justice is a baseball cap and a one of those specialty brew beers, because that's who John is for sure. John has quite deep experience over a lot of different organizations and in different roles, which makes him uniquely prepared to have this conversation with us. John and I were at a conference. Turnkey hosts a gathering, a convening of thought leaders every quarter, and John was at one with me, and we started talking about the interesting interplay between marketing and peer-to-peer fundraising, and how awkward it is, how difficult it is often, and that one of the things that lends complexity to it is not just the organizational chart, which was created many years ago without the existence of peer-to-peer fundraising, but also the complexity that federated models versus consolidated models lend to that conversation as well. And so what we decided is that was worth talking more about, and clearly with the popularity of this session, there's lots of folks on the call, and other conversations we've been in, that has proved true. This is how a lot of us see our organizational chart. And while it's funny to look at, it's really pretty true. There's a lot of lack of trust, I guess, that happens in our organizational charts, and this is what it feels like, particularly if you're looking up from the bottom. It really feels like that. But if you are a peer with someone at the VP level, it can feel that way too, and that's part of what we'll talk about today. First thing we're going to look at is a nonprofit org chart that is pretty traditional, and what you see here is that even this is looks like an affiliate level org chart. But what you can see is that the fundraising director is clearly separated from the communications director. And what's interesting, and what you peer-to-peer fundraisers know, is that you're not even really guaranteed to live in this circle. You could be, off in left field because you are the redheaded stepchild of development. Here's another one. I just did a random web search, and again and again, this is what I saw, where planning and marketing, or communications and marketing, is often one silo, and then development is often in another. And then you look at the for-profit world, and you see a lot of the same thing. There's a lot of separation. But what I did note is that more and more often we're seeing this, where marketing and business development is in the same bucket. And that's really what we're talking about. This is the for-profit organizational chart, but business development being sales, being fundraising, same, and marketing is together there. And John Vranas is or JV, as many people know him, is the king of handwritten stuff. So I'm going to show you his first piece of handwritten art which is the Make-A-Wish Org Chart. And John, I want you to, number one, start talking and tell us a little bit about yourself as we get started here. And then I'd like you to talk to us about what the organizational chart of Make-A-Wish does for you and helps in what ways. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, and I'm glad to be here. Well, first of all, Katrina has me here because I have a very long history of making mistakes and doing and learning from those, and that's really what I wanted to bring here is, you know, there are things we've got right, there's things we've got wrong, and how do we reorder ourselves so that we can become successful. So really I bring a lot of things here that are about mistakes. But in this current, org chart, let me back up and tell you where I came from. I started years ago with the Muscular Dystrophy Association running the summer camp program. And so I just grew from there working at organizations. And my first national endeavor was with Cystic Fibrosis Foundation when they were making the move to Centralized. And I worked for a great CEO by the name of Bob Dressing. And the one thing I will count, two things that I will count as great for me is I've been able to work with some great CEOs, some really good leadership, and I've also been surrounded by an incredible team that I've worked with through the years. And so, successes are collective and not individual, and that's been pretty much a philosophy of mine. And I've seen things get really good when you work with a bunch of like-minded people. And so that brings me to the Make-A-Wish America org chart. And as you can see, there's a little bit of separation. I drew over on the side. There are VPs for mission, finance, CIO, legal, and chapter support. But from a fundraising standpoint, you've got the vice president of development who does individual giving, direct marketing, and digital activation, and then the VP of corporate, which is really building partners as sponsors. But being the chief marketing officer, I currently have the responsibility for the P2P fundraising, and it's slightly different. So as you can see, we've spread our development, our fundraising efforts across 3 portals without answering the entire nature of the organization, because Make-A-Wish is federated. It has 62 chapters and then the national office. Those 2 people to the right of me focus primarily on national endeavors, and there is a chapter distribution of revenue and all of that, but they focus on that, where the peer-to-peer is really directed towards helping the chapters develop their own programs, which is about 40% of the revenue that's raised at chapters is events, not P2P. So as you can see, we have a little bit of spread on our org chart, which means that we have to be very, very tight in our collaboration and our movement forward. And so we can get deeper into what P2P means for everybody within this structure, and federated and non-federated, but it's just a basic setup of how we are now. It's not unusual across the organizations I've been to, and I haven't been everywhere, so I'm sure people have examples that have many different org charts, but there's no set way to do this. I think it really comes down to collaboration. Katrina?
So John, you are saying that the VP development and the VP corporate are really more national-facing efforts, whereas you in the federated model are addressing your affiliates. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Okay.
For the most part, I would say that there are some parts of our development efforts that are now starting to spread out into the major gifts area and individual giving and digital activation, but it's really national in some parts, like digital activation running that, and then with a chapter distribution of revenue model. The P2P is the only one that is completely focused on how do we build the assets that have a best practice and a national look to these P2P, the largest obviously being WOG, and how does that get filtered into the chapters in this federated model? And we're only touching only a small percentage of their event revenue, so we're not even full scale helping them across the board on everything that they do.
So I'm curious too, you have P2P action going on here, which I'm assuming means creating many new names across which your organization, I'm sure, does wealth screening. Do you feed back up to the VP development when you do that sort of thing, or what's your situation there?
That is what we're growing right now. If you look at the current state of the organization, it was very siloed. even in digital activation and direct mail, you're talking about 2 different databases that they're looking at right now. The new VP of development that's come in is really trying to merge that and look at a donor as a donor as a donor. What we haven't gotten really good at yet is looking at the P2P landscape from a global scale. I think some chapters do and some chapters don't, but what is the best practice of treating these people that either get you money or give you money?
Okay. So I would be curious to hear, when you look back at your career, you've been in both these situations with a consolidated or with a federated model. Tell me, if you don't mind, quickly before we go forward, pros and cons of each.
For a centralized model, obviously the pro in this is you can really operate across the enterprise in a very unified way. If you want to launch programs, you can launch faster. You can actually build platforms faster. But it also will allow you to maybe be just a little lazy in the way that you get people on board, and that if you don't watch yourself, you become too top-down, directing and not getting feedback of what does and does not work at the national level. If you look at a federated, this is my first foray into a truly federated. It's a lot slower because there has to be a lot more buy-in, and I don't find that as a negative. I think because we're federated, you know, especially just looking at the Make-A-Wish model, we have incredible chapters that have built all this great support. And so we have to work a little extra hard to get our message through. And so it forces us to build trust and collaboration. And I think that's a big positive. You just can't move as fast.
Okay, so what you're saying, I think, is that in the centralized model, people take shortcuts, and those shortcuts equal authority, meaning they're willing to exert authority before they gain buy-in.
It is one of the potential outcomes that if you don't watch yourself, yes.
Okay, so if you were advising someone in the centralized model, your advice on managing within that model would be to create buy-in even though you have authority, potentially?
I think you have to, because you already own the authority. You already have that. I think that you would have to spend a lot of time making sure that the people that are actually delivering whatever program or product that you have is truly bought into the measure of what you want to do. I don't think that's that far away from a for-profit model. I just think that if Federated teaches us anything, that when people have the authority locally and you have to work harder, there can be a good outcome when it does happen. The downside is people could decide not to be part of it no matter how much you advocate a certain direction.
So that sort of takes us into the federated model where you don't have authority even in times when you might really, really need it because you've got someone who's going rogue. How do you manage in that situation?
Well, I think it takes truly having really good listening skills and doing the work at the local level. You know, in our environment, I know that all 62 of the Make-A-Wish chapters are not all going to come on board, nor should we seek for 100% impact. What we should be doing is working with, obviously, the largest first, the influencers after that, and to bring as many people on board as possible that do understand, you know, a global picture. However, it's essential in the national office to paint that global picture of where we can go. What this means, not in the next 12 months, not to somebody's goals in the next quarter, but what does this look like 3 to 5 years out? Why are you advocating for a certain move, and what does it mean for the organization? And so you have to do a lot of work. We've done that there, especially in the Marcom space, by building 11 of our chapters participate in a monthly task force. It didn't exist before I came here, and it's the Marcom leaders at some of our bigger chapters that once a month are either meeting with the team and or vetting new ideas and projects that we think are important. As we do research, it's run through this group so that we get feedback from the chapters rather quickly. And so we're acting centralized without being centralized.
I like that. So what do you do when you have someone who just absolutely, in a federated model, you have an affiliate that just goes rogue? What do you do?
Well, rogue in this case, each one of our chapters is a separate 501c3. They have certain rights that they can do. They have opt-in and opt-out, and they have guardrails. For me, it is if they're within the guardrails, they have every right to do that. They can go their own way on certain items. But it also makes me go back and look at our guardrails, and we should constantly be refreshing those and making sure that they are in fact benefiting us over the next 5 to 10 years in what we believe we want to do based on the strategic plan. And so I think there's a lot of room here for us to review the guardrails and say, well, if we're going to roll this type of thing out, should it not be an opt-in or opt-out? And we have a process that goes through a committee, so it does take time, which means a lot of our look and view has to be on a long-term strategic goal of where do we want to be, and do the guardrails allow us to get there?
Is there any mindset of using people who do get close to the edges of research and development? I mean, is that a filter through which you look at folks who don't want to follow the national pattern?
I'm not. Rephrase that again. Let me make sure I understand the question.
Okay. So, some of the most successful events have come out of the ranks of the volunteers who are doing things that were not currently on the menu. Things like Relay for Life is a good example. A volunteer started that, and then it grew from there. And the American Cancer Society had the good sense to recognize something that was powerful. But I'm guessing somewhere somebody said, hey, that's too risky. Our lawyers said, no, we shouldn't do that. So, they were able to transcend that and make it part of their portfolio. Do you guys look at, in your current role or in past roles, look at things that people or affiliates are doing that are different from what National is recommending and making use of what they're doing? And what's that process?
All the time.
How does that work?
That's actually, most great programs, whether it be even on the mission side, too, we have to look at our outreach programs, how we get wishes. But I think just about everything we have comes from what a chapter or chapters have done successfully. That's, to me, what best practices are, is that you've aggregated all these things that have happened, and you're repackaging what people are already doing out there. I don't think national office in our current states, that some of them can do that, but are in ideation mode. Now, we can ideate a new idea, but it needs to be with chapter input. It's the philosophy of, none of us is as smart as all of us. And the more people you bring in, especially people that have to execute, the easier it is to launch. But just about all of our programs come from the chapters.
That's fantastic. Is that your experience with all the organizations you've been part of? That sort of openness to ideas coming up as opposed to always being driven down?
Yeah, I mean, even if the national office has the thought, and even when I was at St. Jude, which is very centralized, a lot of the programs that we pushed out were based, even if we had the idea nationally, we worked with a local region to do some test marketing of whether it works, because you're building some people into the pipeline at that point that have done it and can speak on behalf of what it executes or what the execution looks like on the ground. But whether you're centralized or federated, a lot of things are coming out from what's happening at the local level. And it's up to the national office to be smart enough to constantly be looking about what's working out there and what isn't, and then talking to the people that are executing and finding out, is this just like I've seen some that are based on a cult of personality. It's a local volunteer did all these great things, but they put most of the money in it, and it really isn't a scalable program, versus you look at it and you say, wow, this could happen in 20 markets. And then you always get to that point of, people in my market don't do this. And if I really had, $1 for every time I've heard that, I would be retired by now, because it will work in every market. It's just you got to find the right people that will tap into it.
Right. So, I want to connect the dots for folks. We're talking about 4 variables: federated versus centralized, and peer-to-peer versus Marcom. So a lot of what John's talking about is just naturally peer-to-peer and Marcom, because those are the both hats he's wearing. What I want to move to now is, we've talked about being open to ideas coming up from the field, but a large part of your job is to gain buy-in, to get people to go in the national pattern, the one that national is recommending, either in a centralized model or an affiliated model. And I think what you've made clear, which is an interesting thought really, is that regardless of whether you have authority, if you can get them to change willingly, then you're in a better place. So what we're going to do now is look at why change is hard. One of the things that Turnkey is known for is understanding human behavior, and so that, frankly, we can get people to do what we're trying to get them to do. And changing behavior is part of that. I'm going to introduce Otis now. He is Turnkey's behavioral expert. He also happens to be my husband, so if I slip with a, hey, honey, I'm not sexually harassing him, or maybe I am, but it's legal because we're married, and he's not he's a consultant, so he's safe. So Otis, what I want you to talk to us about is, as John and other leaders on this call are trying to get affiliates to buy into what National is prescribing, what are they facing? What are they up against in terms of human decision making?
Yeah, people in general find decision making to be pretty easy, and for a long time, researchers and economists believe that people made, very logical decisions. But in the last 30 years, researchers have uncovered this wide range of mental errors that tend to derail people's thinking. And, we make these errors unconsciously. We experience them as gut feelings. And, you've heard the expression going with your gut. But, oftentimes going with your gut is wrong, which is really why it's important to be aware of these biases and that we have. There are dozens of these biases, and psychologists have given most of them names like, technical things, the mere exposure effect, or narrative fallacies. I'm just going to talk about three this morning. The three mental errors that really show up most frequently and keep us from making good decisions. The first is called loss aversion. Loss aversion is our tendency to strongly prefer avoidances over acquiring gains. So we're very conservative. Research has shown that if someone gives you $10, you'll experience a small boost in satisfaction. But if you lose $10, you will experience a dramatically higher loss in satisfaction. And it turns out, interestingly, that the pain of a loss is about 2 times the pleasure of a gain. So that old expression, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, is really true. And this tendency to avoid losses causes us to make bad decisions and change our behavior simply to keep the things that we already own, or keep doing the things that we're doing. And we're really hardwired to feel protective of the things we already have. And that can lead us to overvalue these things in comparison with the options. And I know I was talking with JV earlier, and he's seen some examples of that in his experience.
Yeah, JV, what comes to mind on this front?
No, I see this, and it is two things: silos and a long vision of what the trade. What are you giving up today to get somewhere else? What is it really costing you? And people don't go through those models of what they are. So the first thing that I see is, one, when people get into their silo, and this is my book of business, and if you take something away, I've lost something. And I see that in cases, and that's why building a more collaborative global enterprise where you're not giving up, you're allowing another area to grow, because the whole idea is to grow for your organization, not for you individually. I think is one way to overcome that. The other one is that long view. If you give this up today and reinvest, because it's about reinvesting things somewhere else, what's the net gain? Everybody's counting the I lose $1, but rather than, wow, that we'll get $3 back if we reallocate those resources somewhere else. And we actually did that when I was at St. Jude, when we cut a major community program, because when we looked at the numbers, why the revenue looked good, it looked like a cash cow. The expenses to make that happen were just, we were not where you wanted to be. We weren't quite upside down. Yet we had people in the pipeline, we had funding, and we decided to use those people and that revenue on another program, and was able to accelerate that program out of the box, and it grew. It was 10 times bigger than that program within 5 years. But it was just sitting down and doing, what is the model, where do we want to be with all of this? But I experienced on both sides. The short-term look really is the biggest one that hurts you.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. Yeah, it's so interesting you mentioned the 3-to-1 ratio, because even at 2-to-1, people still have major sweaty palms over making decisions like this.
Mm. Oh. All right, so the next bias.
You know, Bill Gates is the official poster boy for the second bias. It's the survivorship bias. This is our tendency to focus on the winners and try to learn from them while completely forgetting about the losers who have employed the same strategy. And Bill Gates is a great example. You know, you see Bill Gates, he dropped out of school and became a billionaire, so you conclude that you don't need school in order to be hugely successful. You know, entrepreneurs just need to stop wasting time in class and go out and get started. But you know, of course, it's possible that Bill Gates succeeded in spite of dropping out and not because of it. And for every Bill Gates, there are thousands of others who have done the same thing, who failed. So survivorship bias isn't merely saying that a strategy may not work well for you. It's also saying that we really don't know if the strategy works well at all. And, you know, the bottom line is when the winners are remembered and the losers are forgotten, it becomes very difficult to say if a particular strategy leads to success. Think about the ice bucket challenge. I think about the ice bucket challenge here, and how many people have employed the same strategy. And the ice bucket challenge seemed to catch lightning in a bottle, and so everybody tries to replicate it, but they forget about all the others that, you know, have had very modest results using the same strategy or a very similar strategy.
So Otis, can this work in reverse too? I know one of the challenges we have at Turnkey is that you know, one squeaky wheel, one person who makes a lot of negative noise impacts decision making to a huge degree. Is it the same thing at work?
It is absolutely the same thing in reverse. That's exactly right.
Okay. John, examples from your world?
No, it goes back to my original what I said just before this, is that people can get focused on only the things that work and forget, you know, why did things not work, and spending some time there. But I think it's interesting to look at the Bill Gates, because that was Bill Gates that was able to do that, not necessarily everybody else. And it's, you know, and I think you're right, Otis. People look at that and say, oh, he did it, so I can do, which is good. It's admirable for people to say I can have lofty goals. I always use, well, I won't even go there. But I think that you know, it's about documenting your failures, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up in the beginning. You know, the well-documented failures help you understand how to build success, and also to accept that to get to success, you have to have more failures.
Yeah, that's a great point.
We don't know the journey that Bill Gates is on. We only know the success. We don't know any stumbling blocks he had getting there. Not that I know of. I don't study him that well, but not everything. Even, you know, even Steve Jobs had a huge dark spot that he recovered from. And we tend to focus on what he built versus, well, what caused him at 30 to be tossed out of Apple? What were the mistakes he made that he then corrected in the future that made him a better leader for Apple when he came back?
Mm-hmm. Well said, well said. I guess, too, this is a huge argument for using data to make decisions without preconceived notions about the answer that you want. You know, I mean, you could always send data any way you want. All right, so the last bias we're going to talk about.
Yeah, the last one, this is the 500-pound gorilla. This is really the one that affects people on a daily basis. It's confirmation bias. This is our tendency to search for and pay attention to information that confirms our beliefs, and at the same time ignoring or devaluing information that contradicts those beliefs. And you know, I was just listening to a conversation on NPR the other day about global warming, and I think about confirmation bias. They were just talking right past each other. You know, people like to think they behave like scientists, that they're logical, but they don't. It's not natural for us to formulate a hypothesis and then test various ways to prove it true or false. Instead, what usually happens is that, you know, we form a belief, we assume it's true, and then we just look for and believe information that supports our belief. And if you think about it, people usually don't want new information. What they want is information that validates what they already believe and what their attitudes that they have. So, you know, the bottom line is changing your mind rather is really harder than it looks. The more you believe or you know something, the more you're going to filter out and ignore all information to the contrary. And again, you know, the reason that we need to be aware of this is it really happens at an unconscious level. So we have to consciously be aware that we're doing it and consciously look for alternative explanations.
John, experiences from your world?
I could, if you have that same, put that same screen back up, because this is part of one of my marketing issues that I currently have going, and especially when you look at a brand that has been around 35 years, has a lot going for it, has high familiarity, very, very high quality in what it does. But if I were to take these boxes and take the blue box and say, this would be what the audience wants to hear. If I were to take the gray box and say, this is what we believe, and in the middle is where we should be from a marketing strategy, backed up with documented evidence that our beliefs are validated. People have a hard time sometimes because they believe in the cause so much. A lot of places, if I were to look at Make-A-Wish, other places, they started from the ground up with high advocates believing that this will help. And that's good. That's how movements get started. But in the end, as you get bigger, you reach this certain level, all organizations do, to where, well, I've captured the people that believe like me, but can I get my meaning to more people? And the only way to do that is to find out what are they really looking for that matches what you're doing, and how do you talk to them? Market segmentation fits into this whole bucket. We tend to talk to the same way to all market segments versus what is exactly that market looking for. So, and I watch people, it's drinking the Kool-Aid of what you believe, and you got to do that gut check every now and then and say, well, what is the market telling me about me? And it's a hard look. It's a look into the mirror. It's like doing a 360 evaluation from your peers, your direct reports, and your supervisors and board members. You get a really hard look of what people believe about you and think that you need to do better at, things you never would have thought that you needed to know.
Wow. Wow. Good commentary. You know, one of the things that I wonder is, do people at different levels of the organization behave differently? Otis shared a study with me, actually with an article, Why Smart People Do Stupid Things. Otis, can you talk about that, you know, at the CEO level, at the CDO level? You know, are we more apt to fall prey to what's on screen now, or less apt?
Oh no, you're definitely more apt to, and you know, that's why good leaders surround themselves with people who are going to challenge them in meetings and so forth, because they're aware of this bias. You know, if you know 98% of whatever area it is that you're in, you better be very attuned to the other 2%, or else you're never going to find ways to get better.
I thought one of the interesting things you showed me in that article, Why Smart People Do Stupid Things, the article was about shortcuts, mental shortcuts, and how smart people use them more often, but they can often lead to poor decision making. Can you talk about that just for a moment?
Yeah, you know, so, yeah, sure. What you're referring to is what psychologists call heuristics, and you know, everybody has heuristics that they use every day. We're just programmed to have this set of shortcuts. And again, the thing about heuristics that can be difficult is they're unconscious. We're completely unaware of them. So you really need to be focused on new information and so forth, and be open to looking at it in a fresh way, or else, you know, it's just going to always confirm what you already believe, or and you're never going to see a path to get better, to improve, to have greater gains.
Very good. All right. So at this point, I am going to start off some questions, and we welcome them from the audience. I've got 3 or 4 or 5 already structured, but I have my screen open if the audience has questions. So, John, you have been in enough organizations to be able to answer this question, I think. What do you think is better in helping a nonprofit meet its mission? Federated or centralized, or some hybrid of the two?
2 years ago, yeah, 2 years ago when I walked in the doors at Make-A-Wish, having worked at a pseudo-federated and JDRF, because they really are national, but they work locally and a very centralized organization, I would have clearly said the federated model works. The centralized model works. And now, as I've gotten deeper and understand the real value of a federated organization, that's why you have to come in with this set of open beliefs. You can't, not everything is a nail, and so you can't hammer everything. As I've learned it, what is the value? And so for me, I don't think one or the other works. I think it's the guardrails you set up about how you want to work. And the most important thing is, are you collaborating on the mission? Do you all have the same goals? If you all have the same goals, then either model will work as long as you understand and you put the right people in the pipeline that understand that the whole goal of your mission is to do X. At Make-A-Wish, it is to reach out to more kids and grant more wishes. We all have that goal. Now, how are we going to get there? How are we going to fund that? To me, are very, very easy things to answer. So I would not choose one over the other. The downside of a federated is you might not be able to control the types of people that are in each of the chapters. And I'm not advocating that I want control, but if you don't have a sense of what type of person it takes to do this, and it has to start locally, if you don't have that structure built to have good local boards and good CEOs, which I believe where I am does have that, if you don't have that in place, you can end up with a chapter that just goes their own way and never really comes into the family. They might grant wishes locally for us or do their mission locally, but they might not get the benefit of the entire group and that we all grow together.
Okay. Question from Jara, I hope I pronounced that correctly. In your experience, what are the setbacks of SD being responsible for peer-to-peer?
What are the setbacks? I missed the middle. What are the setbacks of?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question. In your experience, what are the setbacks of SD being responsible for peer-to-peer? Fund development, thank you. What are the setbacks of fund development being responsible for peer-to-peer?
Well, if I read this correctly, fund development is more about the individual giving. We can tend to think that that the road there is higher and major gifts. And my experience is those people start somewhere. And so if you're not doing peer-to-peer, you're leaving three things on the table. You're leaving revenue. It can be a cash cow. You're leaving brand development into a market segment you might not be able to tell your story to. And the third thing, and this is the problem with having fund development on it, is that you're not opening yourself up to new segments. You know, a major giver is a certain person. A planned giver is somebody that leaves you a gift, you know, when they pass away for the most part. But you, right now, if you do your marketing surveys and figure out who likes you and who doesn't, if you don't have market segments across all spectrums, you might not grow your organization to the right size. And so sometimes peer-to-peer is the only way to get a first touch. You know, I can go through a whole list. Number one is, you know, to be able to get somebody to give a second gift, you know, the clear indication of a second gift is the first gift. To get somebody to give a second gift, no matter what it is, you have to be able to have a conversation with them. If you never get their information, you can never have the conversation. Now, I'm not saying all event people become major givers or planned givers. This is when it becomes a numbers game. And peer-to-peer can swell your donor base by thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of your global organization. It's up to you to have a really good donor experience, donor management team that then calls from there people that you can bring into the family to become passionate donors. I just think you're leaving a huge tool on the table if you're not exploring P2P, and if fund development is focused on major gifts. You know, I've heard people say, I'd rather have a $100,000 gift than a $100 gift. My answer has always been, I want both.
You two, the person asking the question, and you, John, could really help me out, because recently as yesterday, I was challenged by a client who is investigating putting up a peer-to-peer program for the first time, and the metric they want to use to gauge success is other organizations' experience in taking a peer-to-peer acquired donor and making them into a major gift donor. What would you say to that requirement? And I don't believe those statistics exist in very many places. Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's going to be hard to find the data, because some of the larger organizations that have been successful at this are not sharing data about where their donors come from. So it is an open platform. And I think saying, you need to show me that they're going to become a major donor, I think is too big of a lift. I think, how many people can you bring into this that you can convert to donors to X organization? I can only use the model that I saw so brilliantly employed, and it wasn't me. You talked about building teams. I worked with incredible people when I was at St. Jude, and there's incredible people there now that have taken it beyond what the rest of us thought it could ever be. So I was part of an early building of that, and it was a philosophical thing, and that is, everyone who wrote a check was a donor to St. Jude, not a donor to Walk, not a donor to radio. The job was, how do I make them a long-term supporter of the cause? And so that should be question one. How many of these people can you convert to long-term donors? I'm going to couch that with a second thing. When people say, hey, I do this annual event every year, and those people that are coming to it, well, they aren't donors. Well, my only comeback is, if they're coming back to your event every year and giving you a check, they're donors. The question is, have you built an engagement strategy that allows them, and this might be the only way they ever give, or to allow them to engage in the organization at a much deeper level, therefore converting them to donors? It's a pyramid. They're all pyramids. It's like a planned giving donor. 35% of planned giving gifts come from people that were in a direct mail file with less than $5,000 of annual giving in their lifetime. I'm sorry, not annual, less than $5,000 in lifetime giving. And so it tells you a lot about the donor. So some places are saying, let's not do direct mail, it costs money. Well, what are you taking off the table when you do that? And I would say the same thing about peer-to-peer. What are you taking off the table in donor development if you are not doing that?
Love it. I'm writing things down and we'll be pretending these are my ideas. Thank you for that. Talk about an organizational chart. One of my theories is that the organizational chart under which we operate in most businesses doesn't match reality anymore due to technology. But I know you have some interesting thoughts about the org chart at large too, so go ahead.
Well, for me, the organizational chart is needed to create lines of management responsibility and levels where people are. But it really starts with building a team. I read an article. Actually, an article was shared with me a couple of years ago by one of the regional directors at JDRF, and it was with Yum Brands. And they talked about what was Yum Brand's success. So let's take it off the nonprofit spectrum. He had the same core team for 10 years. Yeah, there was a little bit of movement in and out, but it was all positive. And this core team learned to work together and solve problems. People ask me all the time what was some of the keys to success of St. Jude's huge rise. And it was having a core team that worked together. There wasn't even a question about titles at that point. So I would say it's not about the org chart. It's about, have you built this type of environment that all voices are heard? I'm talking right down to interns. Are you really building an organization that is tackling problems and involving more people in all of that? And are you using all your tools, or are you siloing yourself and saying, I have to answer all the questions? It's one of my hiring philosophies is, as I tell people when I bring them on board, is I didn't hire you to have the answer, I hired you to find the answer. Most of the people on my team are much smarter in their spaces than I am. My job is to build this great team. So to go back to an org chart, I'm not focused on that. Do you have strategic collaboration? Are you using the people within your spectrum to answer the questions? Are you allowing yourself to hear, if you're responsible for a certain area, are you allowing yourself to hear, different approaches, things that might run different to your already bias about where you think you need to go?
So what I'm hearing is that much of the conflict between peer-to-peer and Marcom and between Federated and Centralized has much less to do with our organization and much more to do with how adept we are at managing the humans inside it.
Yes, I've heard, and because early on when I came here, somebody said, what did you invite the brand department on this? Well, and somebody said, well, what does brand need to be in the room? It's like, because they're creating the look and feel of what you're going to do. And that comes from an age-old way of looking at the marketing department as an output rather than a strategic collaborator. And so personally, if marketing can move more to how can I help you solve this problem versus brand police and I'll print that for you in 60 days, that's the old model. The new model, I think, is, and successful companies have already gotten there. What's the challenge? What's your strategic plan? Let me bring in some of my thought to this, and together we will build an excellent way to launch this program.
How open do you think, and you're in a unique role in that you're wearing both hats, peer-to-peer and Marcom for peer-to-peer, how open do you think the typical marketing department is to that kind of collaboration? I know many of my peer-to-peer clients at the ground level have a huge frustration in that they don't feel like the marketing department, number one, is as accountable as they are. I've got a dollar figure to hit any way I can. Your metrics are much less demanding over in marketing. There's a miss there in terms of urgency sometimes and in terms of message. If adhering to the brand is not helping me raise money or maybe even hurting me in my effort to raise money, I know you've been on both sides of that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
No, and I've been the fundraiser on the other side, very frustrated with my marketing communications teams not giving me what I need and the time I need, being more in the world of what I can't do or here's our limitations. Well, first of all, recognize, like everybody else, is if you have things that are coming up, good planning allows you to have someone aligned with you. I think the other side is, and I learned this through a week of training at Creative. It's a creative leadership course that Make-A-Wish makes you go through. It's highly recommended, and I went through it when I came here. And that is, relying on your old ways of communication do not work with all people, and learning a lot more about yourself. Even though I've been in this business for a while, I've worked with other organizations, still making some critical mistakes about opening myself up to be there. So I would tell anybody who has a frustration with marketing communications, as hard as it is, you've got to say, I've got to be the one to bring them in. Now, I'm not saying that you can get there, I don't know the personalities, but have you really sat down and made them want to own the challenge that you have with you, made them a partner through conversation and communication early on, make them understand what you really need, and then be open enough and listen to what their challenges are. Now, if they're not delivering that, that's more of a leadership issue, but sometimes I sit back and people don't ask me, well, what do you think? So if they don't ask me, how do I make sure I say that? The other side is, am I asking that? So if I feel like I should be asked, am I asking other people, what can I do to help you? Because I see that you have some challenges. What am I missing on? That's one of the hardest things to do for people is to say, I'm not helping you the way I should be. What am I missing? Tell me what you need. And it's got to be the market. And in this case, it's got to be fundraising that needs to go to marketing if they're not reaching it. If it's me on marketing, I got to go to the fundraisers and say, I'm not helping you. What can I do better?
Got it. Let me pose one scenario for you. One of the benefits of having carefully colored gray hair is that you see things over a long period of time. One of the things that I saw in the early part of my career with Relay for Life, when I started serving that organization, handwritten everything, hand-colored signs. They volunteers took the brand and rendered it in every imaginable form and substrate. You know, they baked cakes with it. They planted grass in the form of the logo. They, you know, put it in different colors. And then at some point in, I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s, the organization began to take control of the brand. And without rendering any judgment, from my point of view, one of the things that I saw happen was as they took the brand away from the volunteers, literally took it away from the volunteers, I felt like I saw diminished engagement. So can you talk about that? And diminished engagement clearly means I raised less money. So can you talk about that balance and what, in your mind, is the right space to be in terms of control of the brand?
Yeah, well, the first thing is the brand is not the logo. And that is the hardest thing to get people to understand. I was just recently, I said, how are we going to market this? And somebody said, oh, don't worry, we're going to put the logo on it. I'm like, okay, let's go back. The brand is what people believe about you. That's heart and soul of where you are. Now, getting good, instead of being a place that builds the structure that you can't quite tell who the organization is, then you've got to then rebuild. And we're going through it right now. You have to go back and look at the look and feel. Have I contained it so much that I have a very good corporate look, yet the real action that needs to happen is if I don't have volunteers, you know, and any of us that are in the fundraising business, if you don't have volunteers, you're really not going to get there in what we're doing. There's some great nonprofits that have built, you know, funding models, and then they ship the money out to somebody else to do, and they're really good at it. But for the most part, if you look at we are in child health or health agencies and all these nonprofits, without volunteers, we're nothing. So if you take if they feel you're taking something away, then you're going to have diminished support. So it's up to the brand managers, the people that are managing the marketing and communications, to go out and say, I can give you a corporate feel, or I can build a wider palette of things for you to do that still keep us within the domain of where we want to be. I think it's a dance back and forth. We get too hung up on our colors and logo, and while it's important that you keep that succinct, have you built enough below that in a palette that allows people to do things locally that keeps them happy? One of the first things I did here when I came to Make-A-Wish is my department was brand police and they were trying to go after every gala in the country and saying, you've got to, your invitation has to be in blue, you have to do this, and it's a losing battle because you really want the brand to be visible within the gala where they talk about the mission of the organization. You want the logo to be right, absolutely, but every gala is dependent on a high-level donor within that market that is going to raise you hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And if they want to have a purple and gold themed Mardi Gras gala, and that's going to get that market $1 million, hey, let's make sure we get the messaging right, the stories right, tell what we do right, and that the Make-A-Wish statement is true and really reflects who we are. Let's not get into the color schemes at that point. I don't recommend that for everything, but I think it's a little dance. But it's up to marketers to understand that and to build a little bit more leeway in how it's executed locally.
I imagine there are people both clapping and crying on this call right now after hearing you. I just want to hear you answer this. Do you think, well, number one, do you think turnover is more or less than in the past in nonprofit, or is it a problem?
Turnover, well, there's two types of turnover. There are people that, you know, that get into this, and it's a lot more work than they ever imagined. I've seen people that have come in and said, I'm going to go work for a charity when I retire. It's like, you have no idea what you just said, the amount of work that needs to be done and the lack of resources that you have. That's number one. Number two is there's a lot of people that come in young, and especially if you're on the peer-to-peer side, your life is never ending. I mean, it is all the time, and you either love it, or after about 18 months, you say, wow, I don't know if I can do these 7-day weeks again, or seven-day weeks again, and over and over and over again. So I think it takes a special person. It would be nice if some of the organizations I can see might not be moving with the times. All of these people read Fast Company and other magazines and other websites and blogs, and they hear about great workspaces, at flexible hours, working from home. I think a lot of those, work-life balance is actually allowing people to have a work-life balance rather than stating you're going to have it. And I'm not an HR specialist, so I'm sure I'm breaking a lot of things when I say that. But I think entry level is always going to be high turnover. And then sometimes there isn't enough turnover at some levels. Some people can be around for too long and get set in their ways. And I count myself in that. I was at St. Jude a very long time. It was time for me to move on because I'd done what I could do there and new people needed to come in. Some people do not recognize that sometimes. But I'm not overly concerned about turnover unless it's turnover because of unrealistic expectations. And I hear that a lot, is that expectations are not set in a real way, and therefore you can't succeed. And lots of people are not going to hang around and wait for the failure to happen when they can see it coming.
Mm-hmm. Very good. All right, hard question number 4. If you could build a perfect nonprofit, how would you position Marcom and peer-to-peer?
Well, it depends on where it is. I certainly would put it in the development sphere rather than where it is with me. Like if I look at myself today, I definitely wouldn't have it in the marketing sphere for fact that I don't want it to become siloed. I think we play a role in helping to build it, but if it's in the development, and if development is really about fundraising, not just one line of business, then they are using it, in my belief, in the proper way. They're looking at market segments and they're saying, this is my annual donor pile, this is my major gift pile, here's the people I'm working for plan giving, here's direct mail, here's digital activation, and here's my peer-to-peer segment because this is my community-based fundraising. And it fits the suite of everything you want to do, and then that way you would be, if it were in that pile, I believe there would be a greater look at how then do I then look at all of these different customers that are coming in, and how do I make them repeat customers?
Nice.
I mean, let's face it. In the short ways, if Amazon had built if Amazon did not share who their customers are, and again, I really don't know their model. I didn't work there, but just as from a user, then they'd still just be selling books. I mean, they looked at their customers and they kept spreading and building and building. Their whole idea is customers can do more than one thing, and we need more customers.
Love it. Love it. All right, last hard question. You told me this story years ago, and to me, it just proved that, there really aren't that many rules you can't break. So tell us about this, John.
Well, it's, it was when I was leaving cystic fibrosis. It wasn't really a joke, so if anybody's on from cystic fibrosis, I apologize. I mean, I didn't think it would be used, and I had decided to leave. I was going to go to St. Jude, and one of the things that they had asked me to do is, well, we need to come up with a new logo. And there was no marketing communications department there. There was no outsourced money to go do this. So I went down to CVS and bought those templates where you can do letters, and I wrote great strides in a jagged set of great strides, and then used an array of colors to color them in and turned it in. And about 2 years later, I was walking through a store and I saw a poster up with that on as the Great Strides logo, and I couldn't believe it. It was just a simple act of, all right, here you go, here's a logo, I'm out of here, and they used it. I don't know how long it was in use. Hopefully it wasn't in that long. Their look and feel is so much better and a much better mission statement. We were in a growth mode, but I really was kind of floored that it was still out there because I never really intended for it to be used. Of course, you look back at the Nike model, I think they paid $500 for the swoosh. For somebody to say, when Phil Knight started the company, what's our look going to be? I don't think they knew then it was going to, that swoosh would be iconic, but they needed something to tag on the side of everything.
I love it. Well,
it wasn't a $500,000 buy with an ad agency to do all this research to come up with a look and feel. It was, sometimes you got to go with your gut about what you think works. And I'm not saying that was a good move, but it was kind of funny how you can sometimes overthink things, and obviously it worked for them. They're in the top 30 of peer-to-peer fundraising walks, so I don't think the logo works.
They're doing quite well. Hey, we have one question from Jara. Back to the question about the fund development being responsible for peer-to-peer. Thinking back to that conversation, what do you think the board's responsibility is with peer-to-peer? And I assume that it would be very different from the board's responsibility with major giving.
It is. I think the board's responsibility with major giving is kind of like they have to play a role in that because they're high level. I think the board's responsibility is to support it, but it's the staff's responsibility to show them the three things that peer-to-peer does. It's more than just a revenue and expense model. It is building the brand, and it's a new market segment. And even if people discount their long-term value as donors, and that's going to happen all the time, and you've got to get to your own proof points on that. But even if you have people coming back year after year raising money, then that plays a role in the long-term health of the organization. The brand development, being able to tell your story, that's the part that is missed. I've seen some people that create, let's just go to the basic walk sites, Relay for Life. I mean, it tells the story of who you are. The Komen 3-Day, I mean, fine, then you are wasting your time with doing your walk event. But if you're making it a day-long celebration of what you've done in the last year and telling your story to a segment that might not, you're probably not reaching any other way, then you've done at least the first two parts of revenue and building your brand. So I think you got to tell that story to your board. What is the importance? And you need to use this entire network of we all know each other, and I don't see it as a zero-sum game. We all can be successful in these markets because there are 330 million people in the U.S., and they all have different things they want to support. I think we should draw on each other to say, how do I make this case? And we should be helping each other. That's why we're in this business, is to actually help somebody else.
I love it. John, thank you so much. This was fascinating to listen to you, as it always is. I chase you down every chance I get just to talk. So thank you so much for spending your time with us. It was fantastic. Thank you, Otis. And everyone, we will be putting out the link to this recording if you'd like it for later use, and we'll also, of course, be sending you an invitation to our next Turnkey talk. But I'm not sure if anybody will be more interested than you think. John, you're fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thank you
for anyone who logged in and listened. I appreciate your time, and let me ramble about what I believe.
Well, you ramble with great authority and knowledge, so thanks for that. All right, have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.